Unit 3, Education of Children with Intellectual Differences and the Emotionally and Behaviorally Disturbed in an Inclusive Classroom. Introduction. Dear learners, this unit deals with the fundamental overviews of children with certain forms of impairment, including developmental deviations of each of the target groups, the intellectually different children, communication disorders, the learning difficulties, physical/motor and health-related problems, the behaviorally, emotionally, and socially maladjusted, and children at risk. It also critically investigates the characteristics of inclusive and non-inclusive classroom settings in relation to policies and guidelines in the support systems of education for all. Participation of professionals, parents, regular and special education teachers in supporting education of these children gets emphasis that in turn gives relevant attention to behavior modification, development in social relationships and collaboration in an inclusive classroom/schooling. Unit learning outcomes. Towards successful completion of this unit, the teacher candidates will be able to determine developmental characteristics of children with intellectual differences, the behaviorally and emotionally disturbed children. Identify and assess the educational needs, interests and academic potentialities of children with intellectual difference, the emotionally and behaviorally disturbed children. Value the social and environmental adjustment strategies used to assist these children in an inclusive schooling. Develop an individualized education program valuable to accommodate learning preferences of all children in inclusive classrooms. Activity, direction. The instructor is required to form groups of 5-6 students and provide each group with at least one adaptive skill areas. Each group gives description for each of the specific areas in column 2 and indicators according to a country's context. You may include specific culture of your own, but explain it to the group in detail of mental retardation in the third column. Follow the direction as well as example given below referring to communication skill. Finally, each group presents their discussion outcomes to the class with your assistance. 3.1. The developmental characteristics of children with intellectual differences and the emotionally and behaviorally disturbed. This section mainly focuses on the underlying causes, categories and developmental differences observed on children with mental retardation, the intellectually gifted and talented, and the emotionally and behaviorally disturbed. You can also obtain detailed information on these children's developmental deviations that may interfere with their schooling. Activity. What are the major factors scholars see in defining mental retardation? There are different classifications of mental retardation made by scholars, e.g., psychologists, educators. State both the classifications and discuss on both referring to their assumptions. In what areas does delayed development observed of mental retardation? Which one do you assume is determinant of intellectual capacity, nature versus nurture? Can you imagine any difference between the terms gifted, talented and creative children? What do we mean by externalizing and internalizing behavior? Can you mention some examples on both behaviors? The term mental retardation covers a broad range of children and adults who differ from another in the severity of developmental delay, in the causes of the condition, and in the special educational strategies that have been designed for them. It is important that we remember these differences. Educators define mental retardation in terms of the learning characteristics of children affected. Therefore, the classification of mentally retarded children is usually made on the basis of educational provisions that are to be offered to them. Individuals classified as mentally retarded have a wide range of ability and they need different emotional services. In order to meet these different needs more effectively, mental retardation has been classified into 3 educational levels. 1. Mildly retarded, educable, mentally retarded. 2. Moderately retarded, trainable, mentally retarded. 3. Severely retarded, supportable/life support, mentally retarded. Classification of mental retardation based on DSM-3R level. IQ range: mild, 50 to 70; moderate, 25 to 49; severe, 20 to 34; profound, less than 20. DSM-3 Diagnostics and Statistics Manual of Mental Disorders. Generally, a child who is mildly retarded because of delayed development has the capacity to develop in 3 areas: academic subjects at elementary and advanced grade levels, social adjustment to the point at which the child can eventually adapt independently in the community, occupational potential to be partially or totally self-supporting as an adult. The adaptive capacity of children who are classified under moderate retardation is more seriously impaired. Physically, they have some problems in motor development. With regard to their communication, they can learn to talk or to communication during the preschool years. However, they are only minimally aware of social conventions. They can carry on single conversations. They have some problems in listening and speaking. They can interact with others and create friendships. They can master self-help skills and can typically live in supported settings. The issue of nature versus nurture had been controversial for many years. Some personalities argued that intelligence is innate or inborn capacity of the individual to learn, comprehend and reason. They argued that it is genetically determined, developed and matured with age irrespective of the environment in which a child is born or reared. Others asserted that the degree to which the basic potentiality to be realized always depends on suitable stimulation from the environment in which a child is born or reared. Activity. There is controversy on the contribution of heredity and environment in determining intellectual performance. Which one do you presume is more decisive in intellectual performance development? Both heredity and environment contribute heavily to intellectual performance. The evidence is from twin studies and studies of adopted children indicate that about half the variation among individuals in it is attributable to hereditary factors. But regardless of one's genetic predispositions, barren intellectual environments clearly inhibit cognitive growth, whereas environmental enrichments can clearly promote it. Thus, intelligence and creativity are not fixed entities. Although heredity plays a critical role in an individual's intellectual and creative abilities, there are important environmental stimulations which correlate to them. Today, Superior abilities are generally recognized as developing from an interrelationship between heredity and stimulating environment. Activity. Discuss on different kinds of misbehaviors that you may observe in your classroom being in your respective groups. Give the behavioral manifestations you have observed on these children. Indicate its impact that it may bring on teaching learning and its possible interventions. Students demonstrate many different behavior, and they are said to demonstrate many different kinds of behavior disorders in school and community settings. The magnitude of exhibited behaviors differs from simple deviation to severe disturbances. Terms associated with behavior disorder include aggressive, aloof, annoying, anxious, attention-seeking, avoidant, compulsive, daydreams, depressed, delinquent, destructive, disruptive, distractible, disturbing, erratic, frustrated, short attention span, hostile, hyperactive, immature, impulsive, inattentive, irritable, jealous, manic, negatives, obsessive, passive, preoccupied, restless, rowdy, schizoid, self-conscious, tense, truant, unmotivated, unsocial, zed and withdrawn. Some of the terms used to describe students with behavior disorder are also used to describe students with learning disabilities and students with mental retardation. Emotional or behavioral problems and disorders fall into two very broad classifications. 1. Externalizing behavior, also called under-controlled conduct disorder or acting out, and 2. Internalizing behavior, sometimes called over-controlled anxiety, withdrawal, or acting in. Externalizing behaviors. These are aggressive behaviors expressed outwardly toward other persons. This includes disobedience, disruptiveness, fighting, destructiveness, temper tantrums, irresponsibility, impertinence, jealous, anger, bossiness, profanity, attention-seeking, and boisterousness. Socialized aggression, which includes association with bad companions or gangs, truancy, stealing, and delinquency, defiance of authority, irritability, and troublesomeness. Hostile aggression and hyperactivity. Internalizing behaviors. These are those expressed in a more socially withdrawal operates. These include social withdrawal, anxiety, feeling of inadequacy or inferiority, guilt, shyness, depression, hypersensitivity, chewing fingernails, reclusive, infrequent smiling, chronic sadness, immaturity, which includes a short attention span, preoccupation, clumsiness, passivity, daydreaming, sluggishness, drowsiness, giggling, preference for younger playmaster, and a feeling of being picked on by others. The child worries a great deal and is timid. Anorexia or intense fear of gaining weight, disturbed body image, chronic absence or refusal of appetite for food, causing severe weight loss. Ambulimia, or commercially causing oneself to vomit, limiting weight gain, are two special internalizing behavior disorders. It is important to remember that a given individual can exhibit both externalizing and internalizing behavior, that some individuals vacillate between the two extremes. Since the externalizing behavioral disorders are so obviously disruptive to other people in the environment, They are often identified more quickly in schools than behaviors that are internalizing. Because the problem of children with internalizing behaviors are not easily identified, and therefore don't receive appropriate special educational services. Learning problems, attention problem, hyperactivity, and aggression, for example, are important dimensions of difficulty in schools. Although these dimensions do not tell a teacher why a student behaves in a certain way, or what should be done about it, they at least communicate clearly how a student behaves. The dimensions, which are commonly affected by behavior difficulties, are highlighted below, which assume to be helpful for teachers. Many cognitive deficiencies are attributed to students with serious emotional disturbance. These students are said to have poor memory and short attention spans, and to be preoccupied, overly active, and anxious, among other things. In general, students with behavior disorder score slightly below average intelligence tests. Although the scores of individual students are over the entire range. Academic. Most students with behavior disorders do not do as well academically as one would expect from their scores on intelligence tests. Students with behavior disorder exhibit characteristics which affect educational performance. This means they perform poorly on measures of school achievement. It is also found that students with specific learning disabilities also perform poorly in at least one area of school achievement. Generally speaking, emotional problems can lead to academic problems, and academic problems can lead to emotional problems. Students who demonstrate behavioral and emotional problems in school may be subjected to disciplinary actions, suspension and expulsion, which in turn limits their time in school and exposure to academics. When students so not perform well academically, their perceptions of their own self-worth suffer. Usually, the behavior disordered child is acting out in the classroom, constantly defying the teacher's instructional and classroom rules and procedures. Physical. Most students with behavior disorder are physically normal. The exceptions are those with psychosomatic complaints in which the physical illness actually is brought on by or associated with the individual's emotional state. Students who have serious physical problems can develop behavior disorders, especially when a physical disorder leads others to act negatively toward a student, and the student develops low self-worth that are reflected in behavioral characteristics. Behavioral. This is the primary area in which students with behavior disorder are said to differ from others. The broad behavioral characteristics of these students are specified in the definition of behavioral disorder: an inability to learn, an inability to build or maintain satisfactory interpersonal relationships, inappropriate types of behavior of feelings, a general pervasive mood of unhappiness or depression, and a tendency to develop physical symptoms of fear. Although it is impossible to list all the specific behavioral characteristics of disturbed children, it is possible to describe some general types of behavior that, if not corrected, are likely to handicap the child seriously, like hyperactivity and related problems of aggression, withdrawal, and inadequacy or immaturity. Aggressive behavior. The most common characteristics of behavior disordered children are aggression and acting out. Even though all children sometimes cry, hit others, and refuse to comply with the requests of their parents and teachers, disturbed children do so frequently. The aggressive behavior of children with behavior disorder often occurs with little or no provocation. Aggression takes many forms of verbal abuse toward adults and other children, destructiveness, and vandalism, physical attacks on others it considered to be behavior intended to cause injury or pain, psychological or physical, or to destroy property. These children's own aggressive outbursts often cause others to strike back in attempts to punish them. It is no wonder that others do not like these children, or that they establish few friendships. As many behavior-disordered children grow older, their aggressive behavior causes conflict in the community, leading to confrontation with law enforcement officials and arrests for criminal offenses. Many believe that most children who exhibit deviant behavior patterns will grow out of them with time and become normally functioning adults. Although this popular wisdom may hold true for many children with emotional problems such as withdrawal, fears, and speech impairments, research indicates that it's not so for children who display consistent patterns of aggressive, coercive, antisocial, and/or delinquent behavior. B. Hyperactivity. What behavior does a hyperactive child exhibit? And how does it affect the development of a child? Disabled and mentally retarded children, as well as many emotionally disturbed children characterized by abnormally excessive activity or movement. This high activity level may interfere with the child's learning and cause considerable problems in managing behavior. The term refers to a high rate of socially inappropriate activity, not simply to overactivity or a high rate of movement. The behavior of hyperactive children include failure to follow instructions, failure to complete tasks, tantrums, clumsiness, fighting, and recklessness, for example, makes them not only an object of concern for adults, but unpopular with their peers. Hyperactive children usually do not get along well with other children. Hyperactive children often are also impulsive. They frequently respond quickly and without considering alternatives in social situations and on academic tasks. Typically, their impulses lead them to the wrong response, and they make socially unacceptable or academically incorrect responses, causing them to become pariahs in their neighborhoods and schools. See withdrawn behavior. Withdrawn children keep others at a distance both physically and emotionally. They may lack social approach responses, responsiveness to others' social initiations, or both. Although children who consistently act immaturely and withdrawn do not present threats to others as aggressive children do, their behavior still creates a serious impediment to their development. These children seldom play with other children of their own age. They do not engage in social reciprocity, the mutually satisfying exchange of social reinforcement by pairs of individuals that characterizes normal social development. They usually do not have the social skills necessary to make friends, and have fun and often retreat into their own daydreams and fantasies. Some are fearful of things without reason, frequently complaining of being sick or hurt, and falling into deep bouts of depression. Obviously, these behavior patterns limit the child's chances to take part in and learn from the school and leisure activities that normal children participate in. Inadequacy or immaturity. Immature children may behave in ways that are characteristics of much younger moral children, or they may fail to meet reasonable demands of performance. For example, they may unexpectedly cry or have temperaments, act helpless, regress to primitive behavior, become extremely negative, or show irrational fears. Some disturbed children use their negativism and tantrums to become little tyrants, manipulating their parents into complying with their varying impulse. Others display a picture of helplessness and demand constant adult attendance, just to get them through the activities of daily living. Still others are prisoners of their own extreme, irrational fear, e.g. of school, of animals, and lead lives of seeming desperation in which avoidance of the feared object or situation is a constant concern. Communication. Although many students with behavior disorder or emotional problems have language problems, these are not characteristics of communication that are universal or specific to most of these students. Students who are considered schizophrenic sometimes do demonstrate abnormal language and communication skills. Many never speak, while others develop language and speech disorders like echolalia, illogical or disorganized speech, and inadequate comprehension of verbal instructions. These students represent a very small percentage of those classified as having serious emotional disturbances. 3.2. Educational Program, Identification and Assessment of Learners with Intellectual Difference, Emotional and Behavior Disorders. This section deals with the educational program students with intellectual differences faces. Its main focus is on identification and assessments of educational programs relevant to the mentally retarded children and the gifted and talented ones. It also treats identification of educational program children with behavior and emotional problems faced in the developmental periods. It additionally tries to assess educational preferences of these children in their developmental periods in relation to their behavioral manifestations. Activity. What is the purpose of adaptive criteria in the identification process of children with mental retardation? Do you know what developmental period implies in the definition of mental retardation? Explain it. How do teachers rate behavioral characteristics of children with gifted and talented abilities in their respective classes or schools? What are the major intruding behavioral problems children with behavioral and emotional disturbances face in schools? Specifically, when considering peer groups and the teachers, the adaptive behavior criterion is critical for identifying students with mental retardation. People who function adequately outside the school are not considered mentally retarded, even if they perform poorly on intelligence tests. The adaptive behavior criterion is also central to planning interventions for students with mental retardation. Instruction is directed at areas crucial to successful adaptation in schools, homes, and communities, not just typical academic areas, for example, reading, writing, and arithmetic. Consistent with the American Association for Mental Retardation definition, the developmental period states that mental retardation must manifest before the age of 18. Thus, The disability must have arisen sometime between conception and adulthood, officially the person's 18th birthday. For individuals who acquire their disability after their 18th birthday in an automobile accident, for example, label mental retardation is not applied. Such individuals are usually referred to as having a brain injury, detention, or sometimes a developmental disability. Education programs for mildly retarded students usually stress the basic academic subjects like reading, writing, and arithmetic during the elementary school. The emphasis shifts to vocational training and work-study programs in junior and high schools. Most mildly retarded children master academic skills to higher elementary grade level and are likely to be able to handle semi-skilled jobs well enough to support themselves independently or semi-independently. This level of education extends to tertiary education in developed countries as different research outputs imply depending on the country's economic advance. Most of the children with severe retardation usually have multiple handicaps that interfere with normal instructional procedures. For example, in addition to being mentally retarded, the child may have cerebral palsy and hearing loss. Hence, the goal of the training programs for these children is to establish some level of social adaptation in a controlled environment. Project work: visit school where you can find students with mental retardation. If applicable, otherwise search at least 3 mentally retarded children with different intellectual capacities in your surrounding, and identify their common characteristics and developmental deviations in the following areas. Support your finding with literatures. Rate the students on the following: learning, cognitive, academic, physical, behavioral, communications, social development. Physically gifted children do not differ substantially from other children of their age. Rather, giftedness is a complex concept covering a wide range of abilities and traits. Some students have special talents. They may not be outstanding in academic, but they may have special abilities in music, literature, or leadership. A child may have intellectual abilities that could be found in 1 of 1,000 or more. In general, although gifted children share some common characteristics with other children of their own age, there are observable characteristics displayed by gifted and talented children with cognitive, affective, and societal domains. The following table/diagram shows some characteristics. Teach ratings for behavioral characteristics of superior students. Behavioral characteristics. Teach ratings explanations. 1. Learning characteristics. Has unusually advanced vocabulary for age or grade level. Uses terms in a meaningful way. Has verbal behavior characterized by richnesses of expression, elaboration, and fluency. Is a keen and alert observer. Usually sees more, or gets more out of a story, film, poem, etc. than others. 2. Motivational characteristics. Strives toward perfection, is self-critical, is not easily satisfied with own speed or products. Is quite concerned with right and wrong, good and bad, often evaluates and passes judgment on events, people, and things. 3. Creativity characteristics. Displays a great deal of curiosity about many things. is constantly asking questions about anything and everything, displays a keen sense of humor, and sees humor in situations that may not appear to be humorous to others. 4. Leadership characteristics. Is self-confident with children of his own age as well as adults. Seems comfortable when asked to show work to the class. Tends to dominate others when they are around. Generally directs the activity in which she or he is involved. 5. Visual and arts characteristics. Incorporates a large number of elements into art performing work. Varies the subject and content of artwork. Is adept at role-playing, improvising, acting out situations, on the spot, dramatics. Perceives fine differences in musical tone, pitch, loudness, timbre, duration. Activity. Dear candidates, you are requested to add certain behavioral characteristics of the gifted and talented children manifest as teacher ratings in classroom situation from your experience. Share the result of the group discussion to the class with the help of your instructor. Add as many points as possible. Children with emotional and behavior disorders often are serious with others and themselves, or they are so shy and withdrawn that they seem to be in their own worlds. In either case, playing with others, making friends, and learning all the things a child must learn, and are extremely difficult for these children sometimes to learn properly. Their behavior relates, and sometimes unrelated, to expectations for what is accepted, and causes concern for parents, teachers, or other children. These children are referred to by a variety of terms such as emotionally disturbed, socially maladjusted, psychologically disordered, emotionally handicapped, or even psychotic, if their behavior is extremely abnormal or bizarre. Such children are seldom really liked by anyone. Worse still, they do not even like themselves. They are difficult to be around, and attempts to befriend that may only lead to rejection, verbal abuse, or even physical attack. We will further treat their education and interrelationship in the later subsection. 3.2.1 Education of children with mental retardation in inclusive classes. Students with mental retardation need assistance in learning the content and skills that many of their peers learn without special educational activities. These tactics are important for teaching basic academic skills such as reading, writing, and arithmetic. These students are also in need of special assistance relating what they learn to real-life experiences, that is, functional skills, and adjusting their approaches to the learning activities, i.e., school adaptive behavior. Activity. In your groups, discuss on strategies and intervention techniques to be employed to support children with mental retardation by teachers of inclusive classroom. Your discussion has to base on the identification and assessments conducted on nearby schools. Functional academic skills such as reducing task avoidance, task completion, writing, math skill, and reading can be improved if teachers of mentally retarded students design instruction and practice activities related to everyday life, and given special instruction and extra practice opportunity for them. In teaching mentally retarded children, whether it is functional academic skill, school adaptive behavior, or others, it is advantageous to use task analysis method. Task analysis is breaking down problems and tasks into smaller, sequenced components. Each step is taught in sequence, and individuals move on to the next step only after mastering the previous one. To see how task analysis works, let us see examples of communicating an emergency. Task analyses. Steps in communicating an emergency. 1. Locate phone. 2. Pick up receiver. 3. Dial 9. 4. Dial 9. Number. 5. Put receiver to air. 6. Listen for operator. 7. Give full name. 8. Give full address. 9. Explain emergency. 10. Hang up after operator does. Many mildly retarded children, and even some moderately retarded children, now find themselves in educational mainstreaming with their age mates. Of course, placing these children in the regular classroom without additional help would be a step backward. The regular classroom is supplemented with the special services remedial reading, speech, and communication therapy, psychological counseling available in the school system. Resource room. For mildly retarded children, the resource room provides an opportunity to work with special education teachers and to focus on particular learning problems that are interfering with their performance in the regular classroom. These children leave the classroom for about an hour a day to take part in special reasons. The number of children in resource room at any one time is usually much less than the number in the regular classroom, giving the resource room teacher an opportunity for work individually or in small groups with children who are retarded. 3.2.2 Education of the gifted and talented children in the inclusive schooling. The reasons for going through the process of identifying gifted children are complex. Identification is the first step to a differentiated program, and well-planned program could help the following things that gifted children might face: restricted learning opportunities, poor parent-child relationships, lack of interpersonal relationships. Other negative factors. Activity. Who are the gifted and talented children? How can we identify them? From where do they come from? Discuss on these points thoroughly with your partner in pair. Above all, tightly intelligent and talented children are potentially the most valuable resources of our society. Their talents and potentialities must be identified, cultivated, and developed to the full. Like all exceptional children, gifted and talented children need special help so that they can realize their blessings. So, they have to be identified as early as possible, and that is not an easy task. In Ethiopia, in every generation, many gifted children pass through schools unidentified, and their talents uncultivated. Many may come from low economic backgrounds. Others may come from some cultures that place little stress on verbal ability. Others could drop out of school for economic reasons. Some may face emotional problems that disguise their intellectual ability. Two major procedures are mainly used in the identification of the gifted children: observation methods and psychological tests. A. Observation. Gifted children could be identified, and information is secured through the participation of teachers, peer groups, and school record officers. Nevertheless, the limitation of their involvement created the inherent weaknesses of observation. Certain procedures should be realized. Classroom teachers. Classroom teachers are good sources of information on the identification of the behaviors and characteristics of gifted children. Therefore, classroom teachers should be involved in any program that is designed to identify the problems of the gifted, and in other intervention strategies, and in basic trainings of exceptional children in general, and gifted and talented children in particular. In identification and assessment procedures, teachers mostly employ the child's social, academic, motivational and leadership characteristics. School record officers. The academic achievement results and other recordings obtained through both internal and external testing services are carefully recorded and stored in the school's record offices. Therefore, sufficient records and other information could be secured from the record center. Teachers and other school personnel can easily refer to such available records in order to identify the problems and other characteristics of gifted students. Peer groups. Sometimes and informally information could be secured through peer groups. The information could serve as additional way of obtaining more facts about the gifted in the psychosociometric analysis of the data obtained. Peer groups could simply supply information both positively and negatively on their gifted and talented friends. B. Psychological tests. There had been different psychological tests developed by different personalities for the purpose of good decisions on selection and classification of students for academic, vocational, and other benefits. In order to identify the gifted and talented, intelligence tests is one of the different psychological tests most professionals have been used. Before you see the nature of intelligence tests, you have to be clear about the meaning of intelligence. What is intelligence? The psychometric or testing approach defines intelligence as a trait or set of traits that allows some people to think and solve problems more effectively than others. Intelligence is technically defined as the capacity to think abstractly, to learn, and to integrate new experiences, to adapt new situations and solve problems. Both heredity and environment contributes heavily to intellectual performance. The evidences from twin studies and studies of adopted children indicate that about half the variation among individuals in it is attributable to hereditary factors. But regardless of one's genetic predispositions, barren intellectual environments clearly inhibit cognitive growth, whereas environmental enrichments can clearly promote it. 3.2.3 Educational Program, Identification and Assessment of Learners with Emotional and Behavior Disorders. Often, the first signs of serious emotional disturbance are seen as difficulties with basic biological functions or social responses, e.g. eating, sleeping, eliminating, responding to parents' attempts to comfort, or muddying the parent's body when being held. At the toddler stage, slowness in learning to walk or talk is a sign of potential emotional difficulty. In short, failure to pass ordinary developmental milestones within a normal age range is a danger signal in the case of emotional development, just as in cognitive development. In fact, cognitive and emotional development tends to be closely linked, and neither aspect of a young child's life can be considered in isolation from the other. Activity: discuss on types of behavior and emotional disturbances that you assume are significant in your schools. Mention its behavioral expression to carry out appropriate intervention strategy. Teachers can identify and help children with emotional disorders by the following behaviors as stated by Coe et al. 1955. A. Aggressive maladjustment. Doesn't go along gracefully with the decisions of the teachers or the group. Is quarrelsome. Fights often. Gets mad easily. Is bullying. Picks on others. Occasionally is disruptive of property. Be withdrawn maladjustment. Is noticed by other children. Is neither actively liked nor disliked, just left out. Is one or more of the following: shy, timid, fearful, anxious, excessively quiet, tense. Is easily upset. Feelings are readily hurt. Is easily discouraged. C. General maladjustment. Needs an unusual amount of prodding to get work completed. Is inattentive and indifferent, or apparently lazy. Exhibits nervous mannerisms such as nail-biting, sucking thumb or fingers, suffering, extreme restlessness, muscle twitching, hair twisting, picking, and scratching. Deep and frequent signing. Is actively excluded by most of the children whenever they get a chance. Show failure in school for no apparent reason. Is absent from school frequently or dislikes school intensely. Seems to be more unhappy than most of the children. Achieves much less in school than his ability indicated he should. And is jealous or over-competitive. Assessment of emotional or behavioral problems. Like assessment of problems in various academic areas, that should help us identify these students who need special help. Planning or having programs to address their problems and monitor progress toward reaching their goal is fundamental. An adequate assessment does not focus exclusively on students' behavior. Rather, it includes consideration of the students' social and physical environments and the students and feelings about their circumstances. Assessment should not merely be descriptive of what is, but also should be a process that leads to suggested interventions. Suffice to say that behavioral assessment may employ rating scales and interviews, but relies most heavily on direct observation for measurement of the particular behaviors that are problematic. Behavior rating scales may be used to obtain adults, teachers, and parents' reports of the frequency with which students exhibit specific characteristics. The result of these ratings can then be compared to national or local norms to see the extent to which the students exhibit specific characteristics. The result of these ratings can then be compared to national or local norms to see the extent to which the student's behavior differs from that of other students. Interviews with parents, teachers, and students themselves may be used to assess the perceptions individuals have of the student's behavior and its context. Their explanations for the student's conduct and motivational factors may be important in designing an intervention programs. Direct observation of behavior is most useful in assessing exactly what the student and others do and do not do in specific settings or circumstances. The information obtained from direct observation provides another basis for planning and monitoring intervention. 3.3. Assessment. and elimination of personal, social and environmental barriers in the inclusive schooling to facilitate learning. This section deals with assessments made in the detection of barriers personal, social and environmental children with mental retardations face in lifetime. It includes assessment of familial and community settings that facilitates for the conception and aggravation of these problems, and effort for the elimination or minimization of the aforementioned barriers. Activity: what are the major personal, social and environmental factors that facilitate for mental retardation occur or develop? How can teachers minimize these barriers and make schools as areas of excellence that accommodate for individual learning preferences? Can new role play on the intervention techniques to be devised in your groups as a child with retardation and effective teacher or facilitator? Social skills, self-direction, self-care and health and safety are among the school's adaptive behaviors that are seen as the preeminent intervention targets for students with retardation. Improving the social repertoire of any student is not easy, and it is especially difficult for students experiencing adaptive behavior deficits. Here are some ways to address this area in classroom. Reducing social isolation. To reduce social isolation, provide opportunities for sharing experiences. You first identify special interests and experiences for each of your students and plan group activities to share this information and allow students to get in to know each other. Improving self-direction and self-management. To do this, provide signals for students. Some students with mental retardation have not learned ways to let others know they need help. Some teachers create signal system to replace unacceptable alternatives such as blurting out, wild hand waving, and not asking. For example, raising hand need help. Help sign is a useful way for students to get a teacher's attention without distracting others. Have students practice and discuss as alternative skill / the best way to react / select program situations and discuss on the best way to react when faced with them. Have students generate, discuss and practice as many alternatives as possible. Help students keep track of good behavior. Place an index card on the corners of the students' desks to keep track of appropriate behaviors such as completing assignments and asking for help. Periodically check the cards to be sure the students are monitoring appropriate behavior. Besides, have students with mental retardation share their self-reports with classmates and parents as a means of promoting positive self-concepts and pride in independent behavior. Improving self-care, health, and safety skills. To do this, have students practice and discuss appropriate behaviors. Create mock situations and have students generate, discuss and practice appropriate solutions. Improving leisure and work skills, being successful at work and knowing how to use free time are important adaptive behavior skills that are the focus of interventions for students with retardation mild. Work skills include following directions, being punctual, beginning assignment promptly, staying on task, and completing assignment. These are sometimes addressed with functional academic interventions. Activity: Discuss in your groups on what basically enhance and inhibit intelligence of children in schools. You are advised also to pinpoint how environment plays these roles. Mention in your discussion that what environmental factors significantly hinder intelligence and strategies to be followed to minimize the impacting situations. Intelligence, of course, can be both enhanced and inhibited by the environment. Some of the environmental, social, and cultural factors that enhance or inhibit giftedness and creativity are briefly outlined below. Research reveals that parents who create a stimulating home environment by becoming involved in their children's learning activities, explaining new concepts, and providing age-appropriate challenges and consistent encouragement are likely to have children who score relatively high in academic achievement and children whose early experiences are not rich or diverse often do not develop outstanding cognitive skills, and children who are not challenged in school do not develop their potential. Boredom can inhibit giftedness. Major environmental factors, such as wars, famines, social upheavals, etc., can affect the potential of any individual. Certainly, prenatal malnutrition, isolation, neglect, abuse, insufficient infant stimulation, and poor medical treatments can have devastating effects upon the development of the intellect. The values and norms of some cultures inhibit creativity. Certain cultures are unable or unwilling to tolerate creativity or extreme differences. In a point of fact, we know that variety of factors can contribute to the growth and development of behavior problem. And in the typical case we have good reason to believe that several of these factors are involved. A youngster's misbehavior may be partly biological in origin, partly attributed to the family's child-rearing practice and/or partly due to mismanagement at school, and partly a function of cultural influences. Activity. Try to think how the aforementioned factors contribute to emotional or behavioral disorder of a child. Explain your argument for your group supplemented with evidence. Then make visit to nearby school to identify children with behavior and emotional disturbances with the help of school teachers. Conduct case study at least on 2 misbehaving school children, and suggest on the type of modifications to be made for these children in schools. Instructor's activity. You are advised to arrange necessary facilities, possible interview guides and/or behavior rating checklists, and other relevant materials for the students' conduct case study at schools. 1. Personal factors. For the vast majority of behavior disordered children, there is no evidence of organic injury or disease, i.e. they appear to be biologically healthy and sound. Brain injury or dysfunction has played a critical role in the definition of learning disabilities or behavior disorders, particularly in disorders of cognition and attention. Emotional or behavioral disorders may arise in part from a variety of biological processes, including complex genetic factors and the temperament they foster, like malnutrition, traumatic brain injury, and physical illness. Typically, however, the biological processes work in combination with environmental factors and are not the direct causes of specific problematic behaviors. When all the facts have been sifted, it must be concluded that there is little, if any, consistent suffocative evidence, much with empirical proof, of a biological cause for the vast majority of children's disordered behavior. The types of childhood disorders most frequently linked with suspected biological causes are hyperactivity in childhood psychoses, autism, and childhood schizophrenia. Diet and toxins in the environment are also put toward as possible causative factors of particularly hyperactivity. 2. Family factors. Children undoubtedly learn many of their attitudes and values from their parents and siblings. For example, a child's family unwittingly teaches him or her undesirable attitudes toward school and academic learning or toward authority. For decades, it was known that a home environment lacking educational stimulation is likely to produce children who have learning difficulties. Moreover, decades of research indicates that parental discipline and other aspects of child rearing can contribute to children's emotional and behavioral problems. Discipline that is too lax or too restrictive, especially if the parent is generally hostile toward the child and inconsistent management of the child at home, are likely to foster emotional or behavioral difficulties. Although family factors may play a major role in children's emotional or behavioral problem, one cannot exactly identify the family interactions that are at fault in the individual case. This is partly because the child's behavior can be a cause of parental behavior as well as be caused by it. Certainly, families can contribute to children's emotional or behavioral problems that are mild or severe through abuse, mismanagement, neglect, disorganization, and bad example. However, teachers and others must be careful not to assume that because a child is exhibiting inappropriate behavior, the family is always the cause. It is possible for parents with extremely poor child-rearing skills to have children who behave well. It is also possible for parents who are extremely competent in child-rearing to have children who behave miserably. Teachers must be aware of the way families can foster children's undesirable behavior, but be cautious of blaming parents for children's problems. Teachers must be ready to work with parents for the benefit of the child, and not should sit in judgment on parents' conduct. There is little doubt that behavior is largely shaped by social context. Self and Stowe 1989 identified some family factors which seem to be correlated with emotional and behavioral difficulties in children. These include basic needs being unmet, physical abuse and neglect, overcrowding or a large family size. Unsatisfactory housing conditions and poverty can induce psychological stress and health problems. Marital disorder or broken home, maternal depression/neuroticism, child in care, father any offense against the law, lack of routines that may lead to the child's overtiredness or restlessness, prolonged separation from father may slow down development and can lead to acute distress followed by apathy. Domestic crises and parental disharmony can affect children's emotional well-being. Parental illness can adversely affect children if through ill health, parents are erratic or moody or children are anxious about them, and unsatisfactory parental attitudes and practices. 3. Immediate socializing factors. Children's behavioral development is obviously affected by a wide range of experiences, including interaction with peers and schooling. These are some of the immediate socializing factors to your child. A peer groups opportunities to interact with peers are known to be important for moral behavioral development, but relatively little is known about how much and what kind of interaction is necessary, or how young children's peer relations may be a cause of disordered behavior. It might be expected that children learn inappropriate behavior from their peers, but peer relations also hold great potential for behavior therapy. For example, peers may effectively improve disturbed children's behavior through play, tutoring, modeling, providing examples that the disturbed child may imitate, or by giving prompts or reinforcers for desirable behaviors directed by an adult therapist. B. School factors. Certain characteristics of schooling appear in some cases to be causal factors in troublesome behavior, and teachers must be aware of and ready to change those school experiences that may instigate trouble. That is, before looking to other causal explanations, teachers ought first to make certain that a student's school experience is not contributing to emotional problems. 3.4. Individualized educational plan and curriculum modification to accommodate learning preference of children with intellectual difference in inclusive classroom. This section deals with necessary modifications concern bodies, teachers, family, community, professionals perform to assist education of children with intellectual differences. Other countries' experience and potential research outputs were also discussed to assist teacher candidates' understanding. Activity. How can a teacher plan for effective learning strategy in teaching the mentally retarded children in inclusive classrooms? What are the common tips of effective learning mechanisms you suggest in helping the mentally retarded in schools? What is your personal opinion you forward in assisting children with superior intellectual abilities in inclusive classrooms? Support your suggestion with evidence. Effective teachers of students with mental retardation set high expectations for what they can achieve and focus their instruction on functional activities designed to promote success with real-life problems. A summary of general instructional strategies that should be used by teachers of students with mental retardation is presented in the following table. Top 10 lists of tips for teachers of students with mental retardation. 1. Provide alternative instructional presentations using varied examples and focus on functional skills. 2. Provide opportunities for students to demonstrate understanding. 3. Provide more opportunities for practice than appropriate or necessary for classmates. 4. Use concrete examples when teaching new skills. 5. Provide supportive and corrective feedback more often than necessary for classmates. 6. Modify tests and evaluation measures to compensate for learning problems. 7. Evaluate students' performance and progress more frequently than appropriate or necessary for classmates. 8. Adapt instruction to the environments where what is being learned will be used. 9. Break lessons into smaller parts when teaching complex skills. 10. Be prepared to repeat teaching more frequently than necessary to peers. The cursory look of these educational objectives implies that special programs are essential to achieve all of them. In short, gifted and talented children need individual programs tailored to their unique needs. Relatively speaking, important practical steps have been taken in our country to accommodate disabled children, so that they may succeed in schools and communities. Important sensitizations are carried out through the various media and by their respective associations, e.g., Blind Association, Deaf Association. But little or no effort is made to accommodate the needs of gifted and talented children. Our schools, curriculum and methodologies had not been urging creativity. Our schools neglect children who are divergent thinkers, creative and gifted or talented. These things have to be changed, and we have to promote school systems, curriculum, and an environment which would accommodate the gifted and talented students. Like all exceptional children, gifted and talented children need special help to reach their potential, to fully succeed in schools and in life in general. Although no one special program could meet the individual needs of all the children, the diversity we find among gifted youngsters is reflected in the number and type of adaptations the schools are making to meet their special needs. Gifted and talented children need special instructional techniques, teaching materials, classroom arrangement and teachers. Most educators would agree on 3 general educational objectives for programs of gifted and talented students. Gifted children should master important conceptual systems that are at the level of their abilities in various content or fields. Gifted children should develop skills and strategies that enable them to become more independent, creative and self-sufficient. Gifted children should develop a pleasure and excitement about learning that will carry them through the hard work and routine that is an inevitable part of the process. In the broadest terms, the goals of education for the gifted are not different from the goal of education for all other children. The general important objectives of education of all children, including the gifted, focus on feelings of self-worth, self-confidence, feelings of self-sufficiency, civic responsibility, career competence, intellectual abilities. Yet, there are some specific educational outcomes that are desirable for the gifted and talented in schools. So, they have to be helped to acquire or master these skills. Although professionals do not agree on the best educational approach for gifted and or creative students, currently gaining popularity is the concept of a differential curriculum. It is the flexible application of curriculum targets that ensure content mastery, in-depth and independent learning, and exploration of issues and themes, and allows for acceleration when needed. Let's see the 2 main approaches: the acceleration and enrichment of differential curriculum. Enrichment approach. Experiences are those that add topics or skills to the traditional curriculum, or presenting a particular topic in more depth. Such experiences would let gifted children investigate topics of interest in greater detail than those required in ordinary school curriculum. There are different mechanisms of promoting enrichment. A group of students might spend a small portion of time each week working with instructional materials that enhance creativity or critical thinking skills. Gifted children could be allowed to pursue and study a particular academic subject or a topic in depth on an individual basis. Gifted students could be paired with adults who guide them in applying knowledge to real-life situations. Students all exposed to planned activities that seek to develop thinking skills, problem-solving, and creativity can enhance their learning. Although the enrichment approach is mostly used in the regular classroom settings, some topics of investigation may stem from ongoing activities outside the classrooms or schools. For example, during summer vacation, gifted children could be sent to special programs where they could benefit from the proposed experiences. Acceleration approach means moving students through a curriculum or years of schooling in shorter periods of time than usual. It is speeding up the movement at which the gifted child encounters a given content, class, or grade levels. Acceleration comes in many different forms. 1. Early school admission. The child, once shown to be intellectually and socially mature, is allowed to enter kindergarten at a younger than normal age. 2. Skipping grades. The child is accelerated by completely eliminating one semester or one grade in school. Skipping grade is, of course, unpopular strategy because of its potential for creating temporary adjustment problems for the gifted students. 3. Telescoping grades. The child covers the standard material, but in less time. For example, a 3-year junior high program would be taught over 2 years. 4. Advanced placement. The student takes courses for college credit while still in high school, shortening of the college program. This can be done easily for those students placed or grouped according to their ability. 5. Early college admission. An extraordinarily advanced student may enter college at 13, 14, or 15 years of age. 3.5. Planning for effective learning styles to meet individualized learning preferences of learners with emotional and behavior disturbances in the inclusive classroom. This section refers to effective educational planning relevant in the school environment to facilitate appropriate learning environment to children with behavioral and emotional disorders. Since children with behavior and emotional disturbances have very disruptive situations, the section communicates on critical areas of intervention strategies to be employed by teachers in regular school settings. Activity. How do you evaluate disruptive behaviors? What are the target disruptive behaviors that need correction? Can you suggest on appropriate educational models for effective learning in the education of children with behavior and emotional disturbances? Sometimes behavior of teachers may be a causal factor for inappropriate behavior of students. Do you agree or disagree? Support your opinion with relevant evidence. The direct daily measurement of behavior is useful in assessing the extent of the problem and in judging the success of the methods used to modify it. In the intervention program, the most important consideration in dealing with students' difficult behavior in school is balancing concern for behavioral control with concern for academic and social learning. Although inattentive and disruptive behavior must be controlled in order to teach, The objective of controlling misbehavior there must be balance with a well-designed and implemented instructional program to teach academic and social skills. There are several different approaches to educate children with emotional disturbance, each with its own definitions, purposes of treatment, and types of intervention. Based on the work of Rhodes and Head, 1974, Rhodes and Tracy, 1972, and Kaufman, 1985. There are 6 categories of educational models suggested. These are: 1. Biogenetic. This model suggests that deviant behavior is a physical disorder with genetic or medical cause. It implies that these causes must be aroused to treat the emotional disturbance. Treatment may be medical or nutritional. 2. Psychodynamics, based on the idea that a disordered personality develops out of the interaction of experience and internal mental processes that are out of balance. This model relies on psychotherapy and creative projects for the child, and often relies on the parents, rather than academic remediation. 3. Psychoeducational. This model is concerned with unconscious motivations and underlying conflicts, yet stresses the realistic demands of everyday functioning in school and home. It puts an emphasis on the student's emotional development and growth, as on academic growth. Intervention focuses on therapeutic discussions to allow the children to understand their behavior rationally and plan to change it. 4. Humanistic. This model suggests that the disturbed child is not in touch with his or her own feelings and cannot find self-fulfillment in traditional educational settings. Treatment takes place in an open, personalized setting where the teacher acts as a non-directive, non-authoritarian resource and catalyst for the child's learning. 5. Ecological. This model stresses on the interaction of the child with the people around him or her, and with social institutions. This approach considers children's problems largely emanating from social or cultural forces exerting influence on the individual. Treatment involves teaching the child to function within the family, school, neighborhood, and the large community. 6. Behavioral. This model assumes that the child has learned disordered behavior and has not learned appropriate responses to treat the behavior disorder. A teacher uses applied behavior analysis techniques to teach the child appropriate responses and eliminate inappropriate ones. Few programs or teachers use the techniques suggested by one of these models. Most programs employ electrical methods, and the models themselves are not entirely discrete. They overlap certain areas. Sometimes the difference is primarily a matter of wording. In the following paragraphs, a review of specific tips to be employed in the learning-teaching process are made available for teachers, so that they can make use of the program relevant to learners with emotional and behavior disorders. 1. Make the curriculum meaningful. Build new learning from the previous knowledge and experience of students by holding brainstorming sessions with the students on a specific topic and letting them relate what they know. Giving students a problem and encouraging them to use whatever they already know to get into the problem is encouraged. The teacher can then introduce new concepts and skills required to solve the problem. Use the student's daily experience to clarify new concepts. Make learning more functional by giving the students a chance to apply it to everyday life. Use stories to raise interest in lesson content. Plan field trips and projects. Introduce games and simulations. 2. Create conducive learning environment. Emphasize on the importance of meaning and purpose in learning activities. Set tasks that are both realistic and challenging. Ensure that there is progression in children's work. Provide a variety of learning experiences. Give pupils opportunities to choose. Have a high expectations of success. Create a positive atmosphere for learning. Provide a consistent approach. Recognize and reward the efforts and achievement of pupils. Organize resources to facilitate learning. Encourage pupils to work cooperatively. Monitor progress and provide regular feedback. Help pupils to develop negotiating skills such as listening, managing conflict, assertiveness training, taking risks, accepting responsibility and dealing with feelings. Support the development of a positive self-concept as well as an internal locus of control. Teachers can ask 6 questions about their behavior, the classroom, or the school to assess whether the educational environment might be contributing to students' misbehavior. 1. Is my instructional program sound? Sound instructional program is the first defense against emotional or behavioral problems in school. Instruction offered at the student's feelings of threat, failure, resentment, and defeat is not successful. We should not expect students to be ever successful if they are not being taught well. 2. Are my expectations of the students appropriate? Expectations that is too high for a student's ability lead to constant feelings of failure. Expectations that are too low lead to boredom and lack of progress. A good teacher adjusts expectations to meet the student's level of ability so that improvement is always both possible and challenging. Am I sufficiently sensitive to the student as an individual? A school environment that is conducive to appropriate behavior must allow students sufficient freedom to demonstrate their individuality. Teachers who demand strict uniformity and who are unable to tolerate and encourage appropriate differences among their students are likely to increase the tendency of some to exhibit troublesome behavior. Finding balance between conformity to necessary rules and tolerance for difference is a key to building a school and classroom environment conducive to appropriate behavior. Do I offer reinforcement expertly? In many cases, students with emotional and behavior problems are ignored when they are behaving well and given lots of attention, usually in the form of criticism and reminder threats when they misbehave. This arrangement is certain to perpetuate the student's emotional or behavioral difficulties. Expert enforcement is typically given frequently, immediately, interestingly, and contingent on desired behavior. Am I consistent in managing behavior? Inconsistent management is one factor that is almost certain to increase the tendency of any student to behave. Are desirable models being demonstrated and used? If the teacher's behavior is a desirable model for students, then appropriate conduct may be encouraged, that students also imitate their classmates. Cultural factors, families, and schools have profound influences in behavioral development of a child. But the behavior of children and youths is also shaped by the standards, values and expectations of the larger culture in which they live. The mass media, the neighborhood, one's social group, religion, and social class all affect emotional and behavioral characteristics. In some cases, these cultural influences may contribute to emotional or behavioral problems, particularly if there is conflict between cultures, or if a given culture gives youngsters mixed message. Unit summary. The adaptive behavior criterion is critical for identifying students with mental retardation. People who function adequately outside the school are not considered mentally retarded, even if they perform poorly on intelligence tests. The adaptive behavior criterion is also central to planning interventions for students with mental retardation. Instruction is directed at areas crucial to successful adaptation in schools, homes, and communities, not just typical academic areas, for example, reading, writing, and arithmetic. The criterion to measure the adaptive behavior of a child can vary from place to place. Hence, people in different places may differ in their attitudes towards a child with mental retardation, and in their definitions of the level of the child's retardation. This is due to the fact that the expectation to the child can differ from place to place. In Ethiopia, for example, where there are a great number of tribes, cultures, beliefs and religions, the expectation to the child can vary in these different places. The expectations in rural areas, for instance, are not necessarily the same as the expectations of people in urban areas. Giftedness is a biologically rooted concept, a label for a high level of intelligence that results from the advanced and accelerated integration of functions within the brain. Although some define gifted and talented in the same way, others make a distinction between the two terms. In many situations, a gifted is described as one who has overall superior abilities, whereas a talented student might have a specific skill. Although there is no special program or one special educational adaptation that meets the individual needs of all gifted and talented children, the diversity we find among gifted and talented youngsters is reflected in the number and type of adaptations the schools are making to meet their special needs. In general, gifted and talented students could be helped by changing the learning environment or enriching the learning environment, accelerating education, and by combining the two approaches. Researchers suggest on the 10 top tips for teachers of students with serious emotional disturbances. These tips are of paramount importance in the teaching learning activities to intervene child's behavior in the class. 1. Establish rules for appropriate classroom behavior. 2. Establish consequences for inappropriate classroom behavior. 3. Praise students frequently for appropriate behavior. 4. Be consistent when using consequences for inappropriate behavior. 5. Teach appropriate behaviors and practice them every day. 6. Use preferred activities as rewards for good behavior. 7. Monitor behavior and post performance record. 8. Reward good behavior model. 9. Teach students to monitor their own behavior. 10. Consider developmental levels. before making referral for outside assistance. General assessment strategy be followed in assessing the learner's competence. Whether they develop the desired outcomes. Employ the following activity questions in addition to the tasks set by you. This helps you identify the learners who possess the expected outcomes. After completing the unit, what is the difference between mental retardation and delayed development? Is intelligence determined genetically or environmentally? Reason out your response with proper evidence. What are the basic behavioral manifestations you may observe on children with externalized and internalized behavior? Discuss on the issues that may interfere with the child's educational performances. While a resource room is supposed as useful for education of students with different special needs, explain your response with relevant literature. How can you identify the gifted and talented children in classroom situation? Mention the underlying problem areas/factors for behavior and emotional disorders. How can you manage it in school situation?